in both 2016 and 2020, the polls at this stage significantly underestimated Donald Trump's support. Trump was losing to Biden by 7 points nationally in 2020. He was losing to Hillary by 3, 4 points nationally in 2016. He ended up losing to Biden by 4 points nationally in 2020 and by about 2.5. So in 2016 against Hillary. So if that is the same pattern this time around, that is also good news for Trump. However, and there is a big and important but, in 2022, in the midterm elections, for the first time in a while, polls actually overstated Republican support. Republicans did worse on the night than they had been doing in the polls. So that question is
So in the
absolutely unresolved.
midterms,
Polls got it right this time, or have the or are they going to go, or are they overstating one way or the other?
But let's look at where we are on the campaign trail, first of all, and welcome in our US election watchers. First of all, Sarah Elliott, here in the studio, spokesperson for Republicans overseas and chair of the Hamilton Society. Good evening, Sarah. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
With us remotely in the state of New York, it is Gerry Baker, Times columnist and editor-at-large of the Wall Street Journal. I presume that's where you are, Gerry?
Correct, yes, where I'm.
I took a lucky guess.
Greetings from a very sunny all day in New York.
Well, welcome along with us. Gerry, of course, is a regular voice on the evening edition. You'll recognise Gerry. And Zach Friend joins us as well this evening, Democrat strategist, former campaign spokesperson for Barack Obama and John Kerry. Good evening, Zach.
It's wonderful to be back on with you.
Thank you so much. We'll pivot to the Middle East, I think, in maybe about 10 minutes' time. But I do want to look at where we are on the campaign trail away from the Middle East, first of all. And I think one of the big events of the weekend was Donald Trump revisiting the site where his first assassination attempt took place. Well, not his first, the first assassination attempt on him took place on a stage at a rally in Pennsylvania. Here he is promising an election victory to a crowd of around 25,000 people.
Exactly 12 weeks ago this evening on this very ground, a cold-blooded assassin aimed to silence me and to silence the greatest movement, MAGA, in the history of our country. MAGA. We love MAGA. For 16 harrowing seconds during the gunfire, time stopped as this vicious monster unleashed pure evil from his sniper's perch, not so far away. But by the hand of Providence and the grace of God, that villain did not succeed in his goal, did not come close. He did not stop our movement. He did not break out our spirit. He did not shake our unyielding resolve to save America from evils of poverty, hatred, and destruction. Yet we are here this evening in record numbers. This is a big crowd. This is a big one.
That was Donald Trump speaking in Pennsylvania at the site where an assassination attempt was made on his life. Kamala Harris has also been busy as well. Let's just take a sort of general view of where we're at, because, of course, the US election less than a month away. Let's take a general view, I think, from our panellists, first of all, to work out where we are at the moment. Sarah, for you, first of all, you heard Donald Trump talking there, and we should say the sort of polls, I mean, we talk about the polls every week. We're sort of at neck and neck at the moment. It really feels like this is the point in October, less than a month to go, where maybe it'll remain close the whole way through. I don't know what you think, or whether we will start to see perhaps more familiarity for Kamala Harris start to increase her lead, or maybe for Donald Trump's voters, they are more certain and more set about where they're going to go.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a coin toss to the very bitter end. The country is very divided down the middle. There's very few undecided votes. It's going to end up being 3 million votes in 7 states will decide the outcome of this U.S. election. Most of these undecided voters care about the economy and inflation, but they don't like Donald Trump's divisiveness, but at the same time, they don't understand what Kamala Harris is joyful about. They don't know what she stands for and who she is, really. And so it's all very neck and neck. I think that the Kamala Harris campaign, they're actually more back-footed than it appears, because she is not meeting the Biden 2020 demographics like he was getting with the elderly or with the working class or with blacks and Hispanics. The only area in which she is surpassing Biden 2020 is with the white educated class. And Donald Trump has improved his uneducated non-white demographic by 17 points since 2020. So he also has a very unique, more moderate coalition with Tulsi Gabbard, the former Democratic Congresswoman, RFK Jr., Elon Musk. It's very much it's more centrist and trying to appeal to that independent voter.
Okay, Jerry Baker, for you, I note, across most of the opinion surveys, the economy is the top issue. And migration across the southern border also features very highly. I just wonder whether there's been any bump at all because of those job growth figures, unemployment level that dropped to 4.1%. Are there some headlines here for Kamala Harris to make, or does she, simply have to try and concentrate on other areas?
No, I don't think there's much really upward movement for her potentially on the economy. Even though, as you say, the economy's the overall picture of the economy for the last year or so has been pretty good. Unemployment is low, by historic standards. The economy's been growing at a reasonable pace. The problem, though, is that prices are 20% higher than they were when Joe Biden took office. And though the rate of inflation has come down, prices are still rising, and people are very unhappy with that. That's the fastest acceleration of prices in any presidential term we've seen in 40 years. So, that people go to the stores and they don't think, oh, it's great that the unemployment rate came down to 4.1% if the price of eggs is 30% higher than it was as they remember 4 years ago. So I don't think the economy is going to help much. I'd say, look, a couple of, exactly as Sarah said, and you've said, Kate, this is on a knife edge. Anybody who tells you they know what the result's going to be is either a soothsayer or is lying to you, possibly both. But three very quick things I'd say to watch out for. First is turnout. And, we had 160 million people voted in 2020. We may have a similar number. We've got not quite as accommodating circumstances as there were during the COVID emergency 4 years ago. But if it depends on which side can maximize their turnout, and particularly in those swing states that Sarah was studying, we're going to get some interesting numbers on that in terms of early voting. We're already seeing, for example, that both in registration terms and in terms of the type of people who we know to be voting early, Republicans do seem to be voting in greater numbers than they were 4 years ago. That's a positive sign for Donald Trump, I think. Secondly, it's going to depend to some extent, which is also probably favorable for Trump. Undecided voters, who are probably a tiny, tiny sliver of the electorate at this point, maybe 5 people in Michigan or whatever. But typically speaking, in the final stage of campaign, undecided voters do tend to come down against the incumbent. If they're not going to vote for the party in power, if they're going to vote for the party in power, they've probably already made up their mind.
Because
now the question is,
Jerry, can I just butt in and say a lot of the commentary that we hear is that the undecided voters will be absolutely crucial. They could make, I suppose maybe the margins are so close that maybe they will, but we hear that this crop of undecided voters, the people who maybe wouldn't go out to vote normally, both Trump and Kamala Harris are pressing in on them, but that they might be the deciding factor, but you're saying perhaps not actually.
No, look, of course, in a close election, anything matters,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
The weather may matter. The, ability of people to get to the polls on polling day, whether, Jupiter is retrograde on the cusp of Venus in an election which is decided by a few thousand votes in a few states, any of these things can matter. But I think much more will be about turnout, getting to which candidate is better able to turn out their vote, as I said. And then these swing voters, will they come down against just one other quick final point. The other interesting question is, in both 2016 and 2020, the polls at this stage significantly underestimated Donald Trump's support. Trump was losing to Biden by 7 points nationally in 2020. He was losing to Hillary by 3-4 points nationally in 2016. He ended up losing to Biden by 4 points nationally in 2020 and by about 2.5. So in 2016 against Hillary. So if that is the same pattern this time around, that is also good news for Trump. However, and there is a big and important but, in 2022, in the midterm elections, for the first time in a while, polls actually overstated Republican support. Republicans did worse on the night than they had been doing in the polls. So that question is
So in the
absolutely unresolved.
midterms.
Polls got it right this time, or have the or are they going to go, or are they overstating one way or the other?
Really interesting. Let's go to Zach Friend now. Zach, here's the thing. Kamala Harris, brought in to replace Joe Biden. Big bump of enthusiasm. Democratic National Convention, big bump of enthusiasm. We started to see some momentum for Kamala Harris. The polls were looking pretty good in her favor, some within the margin of error still, but there were more positive headlines perhaps for Kamala Harris than negative ones. And now we're at neck and neck. We're less than a month away. What else have you got? What has Kamala Harris got that she can pull out of the bag or she can ram home in terms of the points she wants to make, the people she's going for, the rabbit out of the hat? Because it feels like Trump is cantering along just fine. Kamala Harris is fine. She's lost a bit of momentum, but it feels like we're going to need something from her or the Democrats. So my question is, what have you got?
Well, I agree with both Jerry and Sarah that this is a razor-thin election. In fact, I think it's within the margin of error, and I don't even think that it's as many votes as Sarah had mentioned. I think it's within some cases less than 10,000 votes across probably 5 states, and not even 7 in each of those states is what I mean.
Yeah.
But I'll say this: I think that Donald Trump has a ceiling. I mean, and his ceiling and his floor are oddly basically the same thing. And so the ultimate question is, on the turnout side, and you're starting to see with the way that Kamala Harris is, specifically some of her media interviews recently, some of the podcasts she's going for in the United States, to me shows you the campaign strategy of who they think they need to turn out, and particularly women and younger voters.
She needs another brat girl summer, doesn't she? I don't know if there's a brat girl autumn or an autumnal equivalent, but it feels like she needs a bit of pep again. It feels like one of those balloons that just slowly deflates over a period of time. You had a great party, and then 2 weeks later, all you've got is this sort of slightly withered balloon at the end of it.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I think that we're forgetting that Donald Trump is good at sucking all of the air out of every room that he's in. I mean, the one thing that he's good at, he drives all the media, right? I mean, he drives the international media discussion. And so trying to actually get into that discussion is important. But remember, most of the people aren't watching CNN or MSNBC or Fox News in the United States. I mean, most people have no idea. In fact, some of the polling that the Kamala Harris campaign did showed that a third of the people that they had polled hadn't even heard that the convention was going on. And so you have to remember that you have to meet people where they are. And I think that there are, this is why they're doing a lot of these sort of different kind of non-traditional media components. But one thing that Jerry didn't mention, and I agree with him about some of the polling and the overstating in 16 and 20, and I appreciate his comment about 22, is that the registration edge, in particular, since Kamala Harris became the presidential nominee in some of the key swing states, has been vastly improving for her. Meaning the new registrants that have taken out have been very much breaking towards Democrats in states like Pennsylvania. And so those would be, in most generally speaking, would be very motivated to vote people. But when you're talking about just a couple thousand votes potentially in, say, Nevada or Georgia, you're talking about 100,000 or less in Pennsylvania. It's a remarkably close race. And also for your listeners, I mean, the United States is a very different system. If this was a popular vote election like it is basically anywhere else in the world, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because Kamala Harris is going to win the popular vote by somewhere to 4 to probably 7 million votes. And in most places, that would make her the president of the United States. But because we have this traditional electoral college system, we're actually having this conversation about how close it is in these swing states. But remember, the majority of Americans that are going to go vote on election day and in advance are going to actually vote for Kamala Harris.
Well,
because
we have the same thing here to some extent. So I do get your point. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Middle East and October the 7th and just how this plays into each campaigner's lot, because we've heard from Kamala Harris today, Joe Biden too. I know Donald Trump will be mentioning this as well, as 2 really busy campaign weeks. Lots of high-profile interviews for both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump over this next week. And maybe this is what Kamala Harris does to sort of build up her momentum. Maybe this is the stage set for Donald Trump as he continues to sort of, talk about what he's he's got to offer, how lucky it is that he's still in the race, and everything that a Donald Trump second term means. So we'll talk about that in just a few moments' time. We're with Sarah Elliott, Zach Friend and Jerry Baker. Kamala Harris, so she's done a CBS 60-minute interview. I think the full lot is yet to be released. She did this on Saturday, but snippets of her discussion on Israel have already been released. This is one of them. So this is whether the US have a real close ally in President Netanyahu of Israel, who continues to attack Gaza and Palestine, of course, and Lebanon, and ignore US calls for a ceasefire.
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
Earlier this week, President Biden was also asked if the Israeli Prime Minister was trying to sway the US election. This is what he had to say.
No administration has helped Israel more than I have. None. 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 And I think Bibi should remember that. And whether he's trying to influence the election or not, I don't know, but I'm not counting on that.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of fact that he responded to that question was interesting, I think. Kamala Harris, before we really got into this election campaign, we questioned what her answers would be on the Israel-Gaza conflict and whether she would be slightly more pro-Palestinian than Joe Biden. But there's really not been much distance between either of them. And that comes with its own risks when you look at states like Michigan. We've seen our own example here in the UK, Keir Starmer losing at least 4 seats because of the pro-Gaza vote. And there is a possibility that that might happen to Kamala Harris as well. As far as Donald Trump's concerned, we'll be avoiding World War III. Iran will be peaceful and all the rest of it. But let's pick up the conversation on this, Sarah Elliott, on how events in the Middle East will inform this US election as we hurtle towards November the 5th.
Well, I think it's already taken center stage with the choice of her running mate, Tim Walz, when she could have chosen Josh Shapiro, the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, the swing state she has to win. And he is Jewish. And why wouldn't she pick a very popular Democratic governor, especially there's a Senate race also in Pennsylvania this year. And she went with the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, not very well known. And actually, there's a lot of criticism for him in his own state. But yes, we're starting to see particularly the Muslim vote in Michigan play out. It played out in the Democratic primary process. They may not come out to vote for her in Michigan if she takes a stance they don't agree with. And this has never happened really in Democratic politics. This issue has never flared up in recent years in elections the way it has this year.
Zach, to come to you, we've not got an awful lot of time left, so I'll ask Zach and Jerry to be fairly brief before a final question, if I can fit it in. Zach, from your point of view, how do the Democrats handle this? You know, I assume American voters don't sort of directly think of foreign policy when they go to the ballots, but it is having an effect.
It is not a top tier issue for most voters, but it's also basically, I agree with Sarah in some respects, it's kind of a no-win situation right now for the Democratic Party. I think that there is a little bit of distance, actually, I would say, with the vice president and the president. I think that she is more diplomacy focused. But at the end of the day, she's going to stand with Israel, and so I don't think that there's going to be a very strong decision, a very strong distance that way.
She's obviously, you know, targeting some of those young voters. It's hard to get them out to vote, but there is a whole, you know, ready waiting pack of voters there to get registered and to get going. And if those young voters are on campuses and they're more likely to be politically engaged, then they may be judging Kamala Harris for her stance on Israel. Jerry, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Its saliency is pretty low. Foreign policy generally doesn't really figure very, very high in voters' minds when they go to the polls. As you've mentioned, the Democrats are concerned about voters in some of the swing states, particularly in Michigan, which has a relatively large, or relative, I should say, a relatively large Arab American population, where there was some opposition expressed to Joe Biden during the Democratic primary. So they are, you know, they're nervous about that. But I don't think it's factoring into the political positions. I think actually what we have is a pretty stark set of alternatives. I disagree a little bit with Zach. I think that there's no question Trump will be very, very, very energetically pro-Israel, very, very strongly a good, strong relationship with Netanyahu. I think Kamala Harris's was evident in that answer that you had a clip from. They are not only are they not she's even less enthusiastic about Netanyahu than Biden was, and he wasn't very. And secondly, I think she does simply represent a very different strand in the Democratic Party's foreign policy from almost any foreign policy president we've had, including Barack Obama, any American president we've had in the last 20 or 30 years, in that she is instinctively, I think, politically much more likely to be pro-Palestinian, much more willing to take, hostile position towards Israel, and certainly that her that her supporters in the Democratic Party will push her in that direction. So yeah, I think it is one of the starker choices we face, even though ironically it's not really very much on voters' minds.
We've got about 30 seconds each. You've all heard of the October surprise, right? Something that might happen in October before November polling. Can you each give me 30 seconds on what could be an October surprise? For Donald Trump, first of all, Sarah Elliott, I can see you studiously here in the studio thinking about this. What does he need to be careful of? What could the October surprise be, good or bad?
Well, I hate to say it, but could it be a third assassination attempt?
Well, just throw it out there, Sarah Elliott. Yes, it could be. It could be. Jerry Baker?
Look, I think there is a risk of political violence, and I think Iran's stated desire to assassinate Donald Trump is something that should be on all of our minds in the course of the next month, because they are pretty determined to do it. Look, but as far as Trump himself is concerned, though, he famously said, "I could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and get away with it." There is almost nothing, I think, I hesitate to say that, there's almost nothing Trump could do or not do in the next month that would really change many voters' minds about him. People have made up their mind. It will be an October shocker rather than October surprise.
Yeah, particularly Republicans feel like they've made their mind up earlier. Yeah. Zach, for you?
Even independents.
Yeah. Zach, for you?
I agree with Jerry. I actually don't think it's possible at this point. I think that so many